Hello and welcome to the next webinar in our series. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Dr. Boris Altemeyer. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer of Cognisess, and for the next around about 30 minutes, I'd like to take you through the topic of gamification in this webinar entitled, "Is this a game to you?" Because we actually think it should be. The topics I'd like to cover today, in not necessarily this order, first of all, what actually is gamification? And then, of course, how does gamification actually impact analytics and HR? Now, it's very important in terms of gamification to understand all the individual aspects that go into it. And there's much more to cover in depth about gamification than we've got time for today. But I'll try to dive in as deeply as I can, as makes sense at this point, to basically also help everyone understand the differences that there are in terms of gamification and the benefits we can get from it, and of course also the drawbacks of gamification that is executed poorly. Can we gamify everything, and should we gamify everything, is always a question that comes up in terms of gamification. I don't want to spoil that aspect yet. I'm not going to give an answer yet. Is this a millennial thing? I don't think so, but we're going to cover that as well. And of course, round off with a summary just to see what actually is the take-home message from today. So please sit back and enjoy. Just as a brief introduction, actually, in terms of what we do, for those of you who are new to Cognisess, who haven't worked with us before, haven't seen what we do. Cognisess is a predictive people analytics company, which basically means that we want to understand people better, and we want to help organizations to understand the talent that they've got, and to also understand what talent they are truly looking for, because who we think we should hire is not necessarily who we should actually hire. And I think gamification plays a huge role in actually understanding human potential a little bit better, which is why it's a topic, very close to my heart. And gamification and general uptake of technology was a huge part of my previous research as well, my doctoral research. And I have to admit that I've always been a gamer from early on. So I'm digressing, but you can see that on the screens that I'm showing you here of the platform that we provide, we use a lot of gamification where it's actually appropriate, because we fundamentally believe that gamification allows us to use a more objective assessment, to use gamification as a more objective assessment tool to actually find out what people really are good at. And basically that helps us help our customers in terms of identifying talent gaps and who actually would perform in a particular, hopefully positive way in their dedicated roles. Now, the partners we work with, as you can see now on the screen, is a quite widespread variety. And I think given the caliber of some of the clients we are working with here, it also goes to show that gamification is quite often a topic that is misunderstood as something that is purely geeky, is purely for fun, and is not to be taken too seriously. Quite the contrary. Some of our largest enterprise clients who take HR, who take personal development, recruitment, and basically talent management very, very seriously, use gamification exactly for this reason, because it's a serious and seriously good way of making HR and analytics a lot better. And it also helps in terms of the brand engagement, as I'm going to cover later on. Because if we see here, AB InBev, world's largest brewer, Coca-Cola, Audi, VW, Vauxhall, and IHG, Intercontinental Hotels Group. These are all brands with very, very strong brand personas. It's absolutely crucial to uphold those brand values when you present your brand to a new potential employee, a candidate in your recruitment process. So first of all, I'd like to start off with gamification is actually bigger than most people think. Whilst I always look out for who's actually playing a mobile game on the train when commuting, or of course being a gamer myself in terms of the gaming industry, to see what the new developments are, a lot of people underestimate how big gaming actually is. And it's not just a fad, and it's not just a small aspect of the entertainment industry. 2017's revenue for the gaming industry was 108 billion US dollars. Now, without a comparison, that doesn't tell us much apart from that is actually already a quite substantial number. Internationally, the movie and film industry only had box office revenues of 40.6 billion, less than half of that. So gamification is huge, and all the game mechanics that are developed for these blockbuster games are very, very important for the game mechanics and how we understand people's behavior as well. So there is a lot of science going into these computer games and these console games that people all over the world are playing. That is, of course, not to say that we should just take whichever new blockbuster game comes out and recruit people based on their high score on that. It doesn't quite work that way. But it allows us to use the technical advances in terms of making recruitment and making gamification more immersive, whilst at the same time remaining accurate and true to the paradigms that we measure. So, yeah, gamification is actually quite a big deal. So there are multiple different aspects to gamification, and I'd just like to cover a few of them. Gamification overall, from our belief definitely, and from what we've seen in the research generally as well, has some major advantages. One of the advantages is accuracy. Now in gamification, what we try to do is we take a paradigm that is task related, and we basically try to model a specific task as closely as we can, because ultimately people's behavior should be traced back to where the decisions are made and where it really happens, and that's the top 3 inches. That's the human brain. Now with gamification, we can find a paradigm that allows us to access exactly, from our current understanding, and that's ever evolving, how people's brains actually use information, and based on that information, plan and action behavior. Now, with that understanding, we can build game paradigms where we can model an information processing stream and a behavioral action stream that is very similar to tasks that need to be carried out in day-to-day work for a particular role, for example, without actually mimicking that exact role. One of those tasks that were previously used for these things are in assessment centers, in particular the in-tray exercises, where you have to multitask and prioritize as you might have to do in your actual job. However, there's a lot of other factors that come into play there, apart from just the anxiety that comes with it being in that situation. If we can use the same paradigm, but gamify it to take the anxiety out of it and actually make it more enjoyable with immediate feedback, then we've got a very, very good chance of getting a lot more accurate data. Then we've got accessibility. With accessibility, the overall point to take into consideration is that a lot of people generally say, oh, I don't test well. I think what people mean with that is they are aware that their performance suffers when they are stressed. And job interviews and assessment centres and face-to-face testing exercises are, let's face it, very, very stressful. It's even worse than public speaking in some instances, because basically we are putting our future on the line here by just trying our very utmost to convince and get the highest possible score in which assessment scenario it might be. The accessibility of gamification or the accessibility advantage of gamification is very substantial. First of all, it can be deployed remotely. There's no reason why someone could not use gamified assessments in a remote location, making the job resourcing, or making the talent pool much wider, because people who would normally, based on their location, maybe travel restrictions, maybe personal restrictions in terms of disabilities, be not able to attend, or at least easily attend, face-to-face sessions or face-to-face testing, they can now take part. They can join the talent pool and show what they are really made of and show what they are really good at. Also, it's very, very good to actually look at gamification in terms of a way of breaking down cultural barriers. Because if gamification is done well, we can get around a lot of language difference difficulties in terms of translation, in terms of validation and reliability across different languages, as well as culturally specific triggers that would normally influence how people interact with a particular assessment. So if gamification is done well, it can break down lots of barriers. And then, of course, something that we are very proud of, and you might remember me going over similar quotes in previous webinars. Basically, the candidate experience is much improved. So these are actual quotes from candidates who went through one of our gamified assessment experiences. Overall, they are, how should I say, they are surprised that they actually enjoyed an assessment, which basically, yeah, that's enough reason for me to get up early on a Monday morning, just to know that we can actually really make a difference with gamified assessments to not only how HR and recruitment is perceived, but also to how people see that their own talent is being recognized. And I think that is incredibly powerful. Gamification ultimately brings us closer to a truer score. So gamification, as I said, is all about basically setting tasks that can be solved in an interactive way. And we want to allow people to track their actual progress as much as we can by giving them immediate feedback. Now, if you use standard old school testing methods, you don't have someone just shouting out the score you've just received, or to give you any feedback on how you're doing. That's normally not how it works. But with gamified assessments, that is one of the key aspects that we're looking at. Give people the opportunity to learn from their behavior and to see, basically as an immediate feedback, as an immediate recognition of their achievement, what is happening around them. So basically what we can do with that is we can not only change the task and either make it harder or easier, or change the task altogether, but we can also adapt the task scenarios based on how someone is performing. As I said earlier, it takes people's attention away from the "I am being assessed," where they very much feel they're being put on the spot. So they relax a bit more. Overall, in terms of their neurochemistry that is going on, or the adrenaline that can to some extent be beneficial and put us a little bit on edge, overall will also wear us out and make us less concentrated on and less good generally in these testing scenarios. That is all taken away by people actually feeling more comfortable in that I can see what I'm doing, I get feedback for what I'm doing, and this is a non-threatening environment, which is absolutely great, because ultimately it's about talent assessment. It shouldn't feel like, if you like, a character assassination. It's all just about what people are truly good at. Overall, yeah, most people find games quite relaxing, and it just overall puts them in a better frame of mind for the entire recruitment experience. The key thing is, however, to do it right, and it's actually not very easy to do good gamification. So one thing that needs to be taken into consideration, and that's something that you see here on the screen, this is Gyrate, one of our assessments, is shapes and colors. Because shapes and colors interact in particular ways in terms of how we can process that information. And the easiest way to actually get that point across is think about any of those visual games, visual illusions, and all the visual trickery that we know is going on, and that we've seen in different research paradigms as well. So our eyes are very easily fooled, and our perception of the information is very easily manipulated. So the colors and the shapes we choose for an assessment are absolutely critical to how well the paradigm that we're trying to test, so the underlying aspect of behavior and performance that we're trying to test, is going to work. What we see here is in Gyrate is that it's most of the time actually better to have a very clean interface that very clearly differentiates between different patterns that need to be interacted with and different colors that are used for highlighting. In terms of accessibility, given that we're going all about shapes and colors in this instance, it's of course also a big another aspect that needs to be taken into consideration for that is that all the colors, for example, should be easy to use and interaction friendly for people with mild to moderate visual impairments and color vision impairments, for example. So all our games go through rigorous testing in terms of, are they actually usable for people with quite severe, for example, color vision impairment? Because the way the game is actually perceived on the screen should be separate from the performance issue. Cultural bias elements quite often come in when we speak about colors and shapes, and of course with any language that is being used as well. So in our gamification approach, we try to get away from any verbal aspects as much as we can. So we try to get away from language as much as we can and rely more on shapes that universally are relatively general in terms of how they are perceived, so they have no cultural connotations. And of course, we use colors that equally are culturally slightly outside the reference framework, so we don't have a positive or negative prompting. As I already said, abstraction is generally more beneficial, and you might be surprised to hear that quite often you will find the more you go away from abstraction to realism, the further away you go from the paradigm. And some of the games that you can find out there, and if we especially think about console or computer games, the actual task paradigm and how people behave is completely broken in relationship to the visualization. The more engaging a game gets visually, the less people actually focus on the task. And one of the anecdotes I'd like to share there is, which is great, two actually. One has been seen in clinical testing, where a clinical testing paradigm was adapted for tests with children. So the idea was to go further and further into a gamified but very visually engaging version of the game that actually included different characters. As soon as you do that, the paradigm breaks down, and the results you actually get are pretty much random. So you're no longer measuring anything, you're just entertaining people, which is not bad as such, but if you actually want usable data, that's probably the worst case scenario. In terms of computer games, one of the games that was released a few years ago, Half-Life 2, was absolutely outstanding in terms of the physics that were included and the things you could do. And what was visible to the developers there was that people got stuck in a particular section of the game and would for a very long time not progress. And initially they couldn't figure out why that would be. Could that be a bug? Was there something unclear about the game? No, it wasn't. It was purely that the physics of the environment at that particular point, and in essence, in that point, that was a truck tire suspended on a rope from a tree branch, like an old school swing, was so realistic and so engaging that people stopped the entire game to spend 10 to 15 minutes just pushing that tire just to see what would happen. So it completely broke the game paradigm in terms of task focus. So yeah, which is why if you look at the games that we use, most of them are relatively simple in the way they are laid out for exactly that reason. It's all about assessing how people actually use information. If it's entertaining at the same time, that's good, but that's not the main focus. Can we actually gamify everything? Or should we gamify everything? I would say probably not. Personality, for example, is very difficult to gamify. Doesn't mean we're not working on it, but that actually is quite involved. So there are aspects where I would say, from the current state of the art, gamification is probably not ready for certain aspects yet, but will be in the very near future. Gamification overall also needs to tick two key boxes. It needs to show us a valid paradigm that is reliable. So it tests what it says on the tin, and also it can be repeated over time and be equally valid. But also it needs to test a paradigm that is actually performance relevant. Not only for GDPR, where we actually have to say, if it's not a relevant aspect, we shouldn't measure it because that's data collection that's unnecessary. It's also that quite often we need to really differentiate between which paradigm is being solved, which area of the brain is actually being engaged, and is this truly a representation of the type of brain activity that someone will engage in their day-to-day job. So I would personally say gamification is great if applied in the right way, but it should never come first. First of all, we need to define what we actually want to assess. Then the gamification on top just provides us with a new tool to generate better, clearer, and truer data. One thing that I hear very often is gamification, that's one of those millennial things, isn't it? Not quite. Well, I would be biased because I'm a gamer, but overall, and I can say that from my doctoral research as well, gamification works for all age groups. However, it needs to be delivered in the right way. So graphics, and that in a way goes with the form follows function approach. Whatever we are testing should be tested in a way and simulated in a way that is appropriate. Whilst you might see a lot of professionals playing Candy Crush whilst they are on the train to work, I would normally, from my perspective, not suggest the same graphics are used or the same representation is used, because it comes across as an entertainment game, what it's designed to do. It's an entertainment game, it's not a professional assessment tool. And we just need to bear in mind that we're using gamification, so game mechanics, to test professionals. We are not using game visualizations to make the whole process necessarily make it look less professional than it is. So game mechanics and professionalism can very much go together. And I think that is where, especially pre-millennial generations, would find that is much more appreciated. A note that also very often comes up, an aspect that often comes up, is would recreational gamers who play on their consoles and computers not have a natural advantage in terms of gamified assessments? To be honest, they probably do. However, if you go by the 10,000 hour rule, if you're that way inclined, you would also have to take into consideration that someone who has spent hundreds or thousands of hours playing computer games and having the benefit of training their information processing, their reaction speeds, and their multitasking in these scenarios, they have put in the work. So they are actually bringing exactly those skills, not just to the gamified assessments, they bring those skills to the workplace. And I think something that's often overlooked there is also the gaming community. And I know of cases where people would normally say, well, no, I do not have any supervisory experience or management experience. However, they are on the weekends playing games online and organizing gamer groups in the massive multiplayer scenarios of hundreds of gamers. So, in a way, I believe that counts for something. So they are honing their skills in their free time, and yeah, as I said, they bring those skills to work. They don't just apply that to the recruitment process. Gamification in HR gives us different benefits, of course. So first of all, we've got more objective assessments. It's less person specific in terms of faking, and it just allows us to give an objective level playing field in terms of culture and in terms of accessibility. We generally have from our client side better outreach that has been reported in terms of actually attracting people to complete a job application. Most people still believe that the first thing in a job application should be a CV, and that's absolutely fine. There's no reason why it shouldn't be. But we believe that if we then can follow up with something that's actually very engaging and very quick to do, then that very, very much broadens the outreach in terms of people actually interested in the role, because they can also see that from a brand perspective, the organization actually takes steps to ensure that the candidate has a good experience and they are really interested in true potential. They don't just want a tick box exercise in terms of has this person received at least a score of XYZ on this paper pencil test. No, they actually want to see how people really behave. And there is a lot of complexity in human behavior. The candidate feedback that we've seen so far from gamified assessments is actually quite phenomenal. People just really enjoy it. Some people, I have to say, even enjoyed it that much that they played far more assessments, given that they were just given free access once they had completed the required assessments for a specific job application. They played hours worth of assessments purely because I actually found that really exciting and engaging, and I think that's the best compliment you can get for gamified assessments. Gamified assessments also give us a lot of insight into the actual reasoning that's going on and how people really make decisions. It's not so far removed in terms of the paradigm from the decision making and brain activity that we know people will engage in that we can't make other inferences as well. The only thing I believe that really needs to be thought through, and where this is really an expert skill, is the gamification, and what is gamified and how it is presented needs to be aligned with the organizational branding and strategy. In an organization that uses gamification as the first step in the candidate journey, normally the candidate would also expect that the same forward-thinking approach is applied in the overall organization, in the overall HR strategy, in the learning and development, and the talent management strategy. So in a way, to have successful gaming implementation, that also means that that way of thinking needs to follow through for the entire candidate and employee journey. For analytics, gamification is pretty much, like I should say it's very much a massive Christmas present for analytics, because on the one hand we get better and more accurate scores, but on the other hand we just have so much more data available. So each move you make in the game, each time between moves, how you make the moves, how react to different changes in the scenarios can all be recorded, it can all be looked into, and it all gives us actually a true insight into how people make decisions, how people like to make decisions, and how they just interact with the world. And that allows us to make so much better predictions in terms of job fit and talent and overall potential than you could ever get from any just paper pencil test. It's quite mind-boggling, actually. Also, the very good thing is it's easily repeatable. So if you want to get an impression of someone over time, that's very easy, because gamification can actually be released very, very quickly and be done and repeated very, very quickly. One of the key aspects of gamification is actually that you can get away with shorter assessment times, because what we're really interested in is how do people generally make their decisions and generally make sense of these scenarios and tackle these problems. So we can, in a very short space of time, get a lot of information. We have the reduced language and culture bias, which means that we can actually merge data sets much more easily. Of course, after checking how much difference we actually see there, but it allows us to generalize a lot more in terms of the analytics, and actually build global norms for some of our clients. And we have a direct task paradigm relationship. We can directly say this person only needs to play those 2 or 3 games, because we know that those actually represent the kind of decision making that they have to do in that kind of role, on that kind of career path. So there's no time wasted, and people really understand when they play the games why they actually played the game. It doesn't feel random, and it doesn't feel like an arbitrary thing to go through, therefore being highly engaging. As a summary, I would say that gamification overall brings immense benefits, as long as the gamification and the gamification implementation is managed well. So overall, it brings us a lot of extra data, a lot of extra understanding, and of course, the candidate experience is, compared to purely a CV upload or filling out an online form, is so much better. However, it looks simple, but it is an expert skill. So most things, and I think that applies to most software out there as well, the more simple it looks and the more simple it is to interact with, the longer it took to develop it and the more expensive it was to actually get that understanding of why exactly this works and that doesn't. And sometimes it's a very, very fine line in terms of the development. Some things work perfectly, but a slight change can already invalidate things. So if you're interested in gamification, I would very much recommend to seek expert advice in that, in terms of companies such as ours, Cognisess, who are using gamification very extensively and have spent years in terms of building up the research behind it and testing those gamified paradigms to really understand what they tell us about human behavior and human performance. It's not something that can be just done very quickly. Not everything can or should be gamified, but overall, I think for a lot of areas, anything that has to do with cognitive performance, a lot that has to do with actual behavior such as risk-taking, emotions, emotional recognition, and similar aspects, gamification is very, very well established in these areas. And in our case, we've got over 60 different assessments and games to choose from. So there's a lot of games to be played out there already. So we'd be very, very happy for you to join that game with us. So yeah, Thank you very much for taking part in this webinar. If you have got any questions later on, or if you would like to try out some gamified assessments, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us, either with myself directly or with anyone from the Cognisess team. So we've got a whole R&D team of psychologists, data scientists and neuroscientists who are more than happy to talk you through different aspects of gamification and answer any questions you might have about specific games. Thank you very much, and have a lovely rest of your day.